Alright guys, welcome back to Ultimate Fishing 2. Today's video is going to be a little bit different. The main reason being that I feel like in today's day and age, we don't really have a whole lot of options to really let ourselves feel like we should. And recently, I was thinking about, well, I've been thinking about a lot of stuff. I think about the content I produce. I think about the work that I'm doing, the impact that I may or may not be having. And one of the things that I like to do with this channel is change up the nature that we have of like game videos or gaming content, right? Sounds like a waterfall. Huh. Sorry, distraction. So what my videos are going to be actually moving forward are going to be a way for me to tell a story, most of which are going to be from my past. In fact, I have a bit of a disclaimer here for you guys. So I'm going to go ahead and read that. I curated this for this purpose, so I may even just cut to this, who knows. Hey friends, before I hand things over to my recorded audio, which is what I'll be transitioning into here, I want to share stories that come straight from my life. But some happened over 20 years ago, and my memory might get a little fuzzy. So some of the details in those memories are going to be fabricated. That doesn't mean that the core of that story, the emotions I felt that day, or any of that kind of stuff is going to be faked. But it's something I feel like you should know before we go into it, right? So, without further ado, I'm gonna go ahead and transition and let it over to my other self and let him pick up where I left off. Thank you guys for listening. Welcome everybody to episode 1, Lines Cast in His Name. It was still dark when we started loading up the Suburban, rods, tackle box, boots I hadn't worn yet. It all went in like muscle memory. News had come the night before, someone close to my dad, just gone. I don't think he slept much, but that morning, he came into my room, woke me up, and asked, "Do you want to go fishing?" I, of course, said yes. We didn't head straight to the lake. First stop was Sam's Coffee Shack, little place off Highway 11. My dad knew half the people in there, their names, stories of which regulars' orders was always wrong. He ordered as usual, and I got myself my usual, which was a hot cocoa, and pretended it didn't make me feel like a little kid. To be honest, it still, to this day, is one of the more embarrassing things I ever did, because I was around 17 or 18 at this point. We grabbed 2 donuts, for the road of course, and a couple of breakfast sandwiches each, so that we could have something to eat while we were out fishing. Afterwards, we were back on the road, windows cracked just enough to let the cold remind us we were alive. He would crack a joke about the playlist, and I'd complain about my cocoa being too hot. We weren't quiet, but we didn't talk about the loss either. That was just how he mourned, by moving, laughing, and casting lines before the sun was fully awake. Afterwards, can't go fishing without bait, so we'd hit the local bait and tackle shop. It sat off the road like an old friend, weathered siding, open sign flickering like it hadn't slept. We grabbed a tub of leeches and a carton of night crawlers, same as always. The shop owner gave my dad a look, one of those grins that said, "Ready for today's punchline?" Whatever they said to each other, I can't recall. It was probably inappropriate. But I remember the way my dad smiled. Wide, easy. Like whatever weight he was carrying took a coffee break of its own. It's kind of funny how grief can show up dressed like joy. In old jokes, in rituals so ordinary you don't notice how sacred they've become. Back in the Suburban, we didn't touch the sandwiches or the donuts, never did. That was for when the water was in front of us. We just sipped our drinks while they were still hot, and let the quiet do what it needed to. We pulled into the lot like we'd done 100 times before. We fished out at Cherry Creek Reservoir in Colorado. We had something what we called our spot. It was tucked down past these old wood steps that we had to walk down to get to these fishing locations, you could call them. They were round, circular, I don't want to say abutments, but they jutted out from the shoreline to give you a little bit of extra depth in the water, since it was a reservoir after all. The one we picked always had some of the best shade. I personally sat next to my father on the next one up that was a little bit more elevated and gave me just a little bit more reach with the rod. Around 6:30 his phone rang. It was sharp and sudden, like the sound didn't belong where we were. He answered without standing, just murmured a few words that I couldn't make out, because I was, sitting a little bit further from him. And when he hung up, I asked who it was. He didn't meet my eyes, just kept looking across the water. It was your mother. She wants us to come back, says we need to get ready for the funeral. There was a long pause, no cast, no movement, just the breeze, curling in like it knew not to interrupt. And then he finally turned to me and said, he wouldn't want us cooped up in some stuffy church crying over his death. He'd want a rod in one hand and the sun on his back. And with that, he eased into his chair. His eyes were fixed on the gentle arc of his line, waiting. Not for a fish. I think just for the silence to understand. We stayed after the call, not in defiance of it, but maybe because part of us wasn't quite ready to let go of the morning. As I recall, around 8 o'clock, you could hear another vehicle pull up into the parking lot up the road. We could hear the sound of someone shuffling and someone gathering up their own gear. My dad stood, already smiling. You see, Chauncey was a man that my dad had met while fishing out at Cherry Creek Reservoir. And when he saw him coming, especially with the news he had just been given the night before, he was ecstatic. I remember him calling out to him, saying, "Chauncey!" That voice changed. It carried something light. Not joy exactly, but that easy warmth he kept tucked in his back pocket for just the right moments. Chauncey grinned like he'd been expected, tackle box in hand, bucket swinging. He was short, slow-moving, calm like a man who only ever measured time in fish caught or sunset seen. Really, Chauncey was one of those guys that he was an older gentleman, probably in his, I think he was in his 70s. Didn't really talk to him much myself, but my dad got to know him real well. My dad and Chauncey hadn't known each other for long, which is very true. In fact, I think they only knew each other for maybe 3 or 4 seasons before things started to shift and we had to move. But they greeted like friends who'd once gotten into a bar fight together and still laughed about it, which is exceedingly true. My dad was somebody who could make friends with almost anybody, to be honest with you. I never followed their conversations too closely, because I didn't really care, because I was 18 and just didn't give a shit. Some new bait trick, a story from a lake in Oregon, something about septic hookups at national parks, but I remember the way my dad leaned back in his chair, hands clasped over his stomach, laughing like the morning hadn't just started with grief. I sipped my cocoa, which was probably lukewarm by this point, and sat quiet, not out of discomfort, just peace. That was my rhythm. Watch, listen, and hold space. Chauncey eventually wandered to the next circle over, still within earshot, but far enough to let the lines have their space. My dad glanced over at me and smirked. "I'm still gonna take that $1 off you, he'd say. And I'd respond with, "Not if the fish like introverts today." He chuckled. "Then you better hope they're shy as hell," would be his response. We just sat there after that, casting occasionally, talking about everything and nothing really. The kind of conversations that can only happen when the world stops asking you to be somewhere else. No, I think this was part of the fishing he really loved. Not the catch, but the pause. The way a lake listens, if you know what I mean. The way strangers feel like friends and friends feel like family. That morning didn't teach me anything dramatic. No revelations, no breakthroughs, just this soft truth that memory isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just a smile between two old friends. Sometimes it's a bet over $1 you never exchange. Sometimes, memory is the moment you didn't notice was sacred until years later, sitting alone, editing pixelated ripples on a digital lake, and realizing you still remember the way the air smelled. You know, there's a lot I've forgotten since that morning. I don't remember what song played on the way home. I don't remember who won the dollar bet. Probably my dad, to be fair. I don't even remember if we stopped for lunch or just let the day end where it needed to. But some things I remember like they're sewn into me. My dad's smile when he saw Chauncey walking towards us. That beat-up old tackle box he'd never replace. The way his line hardly ever moved, but he still watched it like something important might happen. That memory lives pretty loud in me, and it's strange how this digital lake, these pixel-built moments, somehow draw it all back like it never left. I know it's not real. The ripples repeat, the birds are on a loop. This isn't Cherry Creek. And that chair in the corner of my screen isn't the sun-bleached one with frayed armrests he used to sit in. But here's the thing. It feels real where it matters. Because it's not about the textures or the AI fish or the fake weather. It's about what fills the silence. It's about presence. Mine, yours, his. Sitting here, line cast into nothing, just breathing and remembering. I feel close to him. Maybe closer than I've felt in years. I used to think legacy was something loud, big, and permanent. Now I think it's this, a borrowed morning, a voice shared, a memory passed down without needing to be taught. Maybe this is how we honor people. We keep casting, keep telling their stories, keep sitting in their chairs, even if it's just the digital version. This isn't a fishing trip, it's a conversation with the past, with myself, and with you. And if you're here listening, and if he's listening, if somewhere beyond everything he's tuned in for just this one moment, I hope he's smiling because I am. Now, you are pretty special if you've stayed with me this long, and I'd like to thank you for that. This story wasn't one I had planned to tell when I had hit record. But sometimes, the lake brings out what needs to surface. Sometimes you cast farther than you meant to, and reel back something unexpected. I don't know if my father's watching. I don't know what comes next after all of this. But I do know this. He's part of everything I do now. In the way I sit still, in the way I pause between words, and in the way I try, and I do mean really try, to meet people with the same warmth he carried so effortlessly. And maybe that's legacy. Not monuments or medals, just the quiet way we keep our people alive, by becoming more like the parts of them we loved most. So if you're still here, thank you again for sharing this time with me. I will be doing more of these. Some stories will be fiction, but most of them will probably be true. Some may be a little bit of both, but every single one will come from a place that matters, from my memories, from the meaning I pulled from those memories. From a quiet little circle at the edge of a reservoir where a man once watched his line and taught me how to hold space for loss and life. Hey, if you're still here, thank you. I know this might have looked like a fishing game on the surface, just a guy casting lines into digital water and talking to himself. But that story, that morning, and that memory, it was real. Not every tale I tell here will come from my life, but the emotions, the way they sit in your chest long after the line goes slack, those are real. I craft these stories with care and with intentions. Whether they're rooted in truth or spun from threads of fiction, I hope they reach you in a way that matters. Because connection doesn't need to be in person. It just needs to be honest.